Hi, I'm Tom Morell, brand strategist with over 15 years experience working for some of the UK's largest companies. I want to decode everything related to brand and AI on my podcast. Today I'm joined with Harry Verity, former tech journalist, now turned AI evangelist. Harry.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome to this inaugural podcast, and thank you very much for joining. I've obviously got to know you over the last couple of months attending your AI founders meetings here in Bali, but the audience and listeners don't know you so well. So I'd love it if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you down this path to AI.
Sure. So I'm Harry Verity. I started my life as a tech journalist. I guess we were talking a little bit off camera about how I started in that wider journalism in the UK, kind of similar to you in the tech production, and then I just became really fascinated with AI technology about 2 years ago and its potential, and I immediately saw the way this was heading and the things that it could do. Was using some very early AI tools. I've established in the last few months AI to the World, which is a company which helps CEOs basically implement AI in their business, look at holistically at their entire business and understand where their blind spots are and where they can implement it, and also does some training as well. Also helps the staff understand what AI is and how they can actually be using it practically in their day-to-day role.
So as you're a journalist and you have that journalistic mindset, I assume you're very curious about the world and technology.
I am. Yeah.
So why in particular AI or generative AI? Why has that sparked your curiosity to the extent that it has?
Yeah, that is a very good question. So I think this technology is, I suppose it's unusual in the sense that it has exponential potential, is what I see in it, and it's only getting better and better and better. And I am a big picture person. I think about things in very, very broad terms, and the way I think is we know so little about the universe that we live in. I think we get into this space of sort of AI alarmism and people saying AI is going to take all our jobs. Actually, when you think about how little we even know of this planet and the rest of the universe, within my lifetime, we've been able to find exoplanets. And so before the 1990s, we had no idea what else existed in the rest of the other nearby solar systems. And now we've started to be able to detect, I think, 5,000 exoplanets. So you really get a sense of like, wow, how little we know and how much there is to know. And I remember being at school and we launched the New Horizons probe in about 2006. And in the textbook we were studying at the time in space, at the time this rocket was launching, we had no picture of Pluto. It was just a fuzzy little dot because it was so far away. And then 9 years later, of course, this New Horizons probe gets high resolution images of Pluto when I was in my sort of late teens. So yeah, it was a huge moment, and those kind of moments really, I think AI will help us to get there, and it could potentially help us uncover a lot more understanding a lot more quickly. Another example would be what DeepMind have done with with uncovering, I think, mapping the proton sequences. I think we've got to about 99% of mapping the protons, the genomes of the proton structure, I think it is, and we'd hardly done anything with it until AI came along. So its potential to help us just speed things along a bit, I think, is just incredible. So that, if you ask me, what about this is inspires me, or what is it about this particular technology, then I would say it's just potential to really solve some of the biggest mysteries and 10x, 100x, 1000x understanding of the universe in which we live.
Really interesting to hear. Behind AI to the world, is there a particular mission that you're sort of striving for? I know from the sort of weekly meetings that you're very keen on collaboration without borders. We have people from different parts of the globe kind of connecting together, learning and hearing your insights. But is there something specific about AI to the world that you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, so there was a recent statistic that said, I think 83% of businesses consider AI to be a top priority, particularly in 2025. But if you ask them, there was a similar survey by PwC that said only 49% of technology leaders would say their business had fully embraced and fully implemented AI. So you can see that disconnect, that there's a lot of businesses and a lot of CEOs that want to implement AI, but they haven't managed to achieve that. And so as a former journalist, I feel that the mission of the company is really to help people both implement AI and both be able to understand it in a non-technical way as well. So I have, through that meeting and through my journalistic connections, met some researchers and consider them friends from DeepMind, from OpenAI, from a whole number of different places, these research labs. And you will often hear them speak, and it's like they're speaking another language. And so if you just bring on one of those guys into your company, as talented and as clever as they are, there can often be a disconnect, and then maybe not the right type of people to train everybody. At the same time, there's also a lot of AI hype and a lot of people claiming that they can do things which perhaps they can't. So our fundamental approach is to approach the business, to look at it holistically, but also to combine that with training as well. So the company has their staff trained up and has an understanding of this technology. I mean, that's why we called it AI to the world, me and my business partner, because we are literally helping to bring AI to the world. And so people we hope will leave with an understanding of AI, as well as being able to actually have some, ROI and some takeaways there.
Yeah, I think the hype point is really interesting one for me at the moment. It's something that I'm noticing that I'm getting a bit frustrated about. I think firstly, the fact that, AI has been around, it's not something new. I guess it's more the generative aspect of it, which is maybe something which is causing people to take notice a little bit more than previously. But then there's this slight sort of thinking or feeling that people can almost put their pens down and AI is going to do everything for them. There's kind of this sort of mentality, which I think is a bit misleading. And then also on the other side, people are talking about AI in very sort of generalist terms. And I think the sort of sweet spot in the middle, which sounds like what you're trying to aim for, is what's its actual application, and what are real user cases for AI, and is that something that you're finding as well in your consultation with people?
Yeah, absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head. This is a very easy hype train to get on, and as you said, neural networks have been around since the 1960s. I almost find that AI is an almost unhelpful term. It's not really very specific. And in some ways it's misleading, because I think what it creates this picture of in people's head, and what a lot of this AI hype train does, is paint this picture of this sentient being that is learning and getting cleverer and better all the time, that's eventually going to take over the world. And that's not what the technology is. The technology is fundamentally different strands of technology. It's all machine learning. I think that's a better, more accurate term, and it simply learns and sort of gets better on itself. But all of these applications are not necessarily connected. And as I always say at the meetings, AI is just a prediction machine. It's about what you put into it. It looks at its training data, and then it tries to predict what comes next in the sequence. That's all it is. It's nothing more complicated than that. So we're trying to just look for how that can be applicable to businesses, how it can make businesses, sure, leaner, but also how they can do more, how it can put their current team to generate more returns for them, how it can make their team more productive. I don't think we're going to end up in a space where it's going to suddenly take everybody's jobs. I just think people will be doing different jobs, and we may have smaller companies that have more resources. So we might move away from a world where we have 1,000 people, 10,000 people companies, that might become an inefficient way of doing things. But we might move to a world where you work with a small team, but they're able to put out the same output as a company in the past that had 10,000 employees.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Are you also, from your experience, noticing a lot of resistance to applying generative AI into business workflows? I mean, what I've got in the back of my mind is, I think when new technologies come along, there tends to be this sort of friction. I mean, from what I understand, when the radio came along, I think in the US that they were saying like it was impacting business efficiency, and culture was declining because of it, and children weren't performing as well at schools, and there was all this kind of fear about it. And I think that's going on a little bit now. Are you seeing those kind of fears and anxieties around this technology?
Yeah, so let's take an example. So one of the biggest examples that we see is around copywriting, for instance. So being a journalist and also, a writer in my own time, I publish books as well. Copy is something that's very dear to my heart. And a lot of people have this view, a lot of businesses that we approach basically go to ChatGPT or they go to Claude and they say, write me a post. Mm-hmm. Maybe they do a little bit of prompt engineering and they expect high quality copy, and then it doesn't. It just gives them mediocre copy with rocket emojis and with overuse of the word delve. So they have this perception that that's all the technology that it can do, that's the only output that it can do, and that's all that they can see. So they sort of dismiss that technology. And so they dismiss it as being not very useful, or worse, perhaps they don't have an oversight of what actually good copy actually is. And so they think this copy is great, it's just doing the work and the task for them, so they don't have to employ any writers anymore. Both those positions are wrong. And so the correct position is to actually go in and build systems and processes around your existing writing team to help improve it, and to also in a way train the LLMs, not necessarily train them, but create projects or create tools that are trained on the brand voice, on all the brand guidelines, and all the things that you would give a writer at an agency that was just starting off. So I think a lot of people are misled by things they read on social media, that this is a quick fix and that you can simply ask ChatGPT to write you a piece of copy and it's going to write it for you. So that's an example of a frustration. And then often those people will be resistant to adopting any AI in their company because they'll say, well, it just churns out this garbage. And of course the reality is it doesn't always churn out garbage if you have the right training and the right prompts and you build the right tools and you build the right systems around it. And it's also not the case that it's just going to replace all your writers as well. So that's a really good example of how this hype train that you talked about and this sort of resistance. And I think the answer is always education in those cases.
I mean, I love the fact that you brought up this content piece and copywriting. I feel like you're the perfect person to almost like talk about this. I've got a few more questions on it. So, if you were talking to a copywriter in the creative sort of brand sphere, what would you be saying to them in terms of like their, upping their skill set or some kind of knowledge that they need to get their heads around, to be able to kind of meet the technology at where it's at and to protect their career and so on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So if you're a writer in an organization or a content manager and you want to protect your career, I think that you can do several things. And also, if you're a CEO of a branding agency and you're also thinking about how do you empower your employees with AI, with LLMs, you could do some very simple things. So first of all, everybody has access to ChatGPT and Claude. Claude is my LLM of choice. I think it's still the best LLM for copywriting. If you have the premium version of Claude, you can set up a project. In a project, you want to give it all the brand guidelines of the company, all the context of the company. You want to go through all the social media posts and find the ones that have done the most well, or that meet the objectives of the company, and give those to the project. You also want to specify the data. So if you're on LinkedIn, how many followers and how many connections do you have and who are these people. If it's Instagram that is the focus for the company, then information about that as well, the visuals of the posts as well. So you want to give all of that to a project, we call it, in Claude, or in ChatGPT. I think it's a custom GPT. So you really want to spend a few hours setting that up. You want to engage the right people in the team to be able to do that. And perhaps you also want to interview some people in the team as well to ask them what has done well, what is your current process, what is your current SOP. You want to feed all that information to the project. And then the second component will be some custom instructions. So the custom instructions will be giving you the step-by-step breakdown of what you want the content piece to be. So this can be how many words it is, what words it should use, what tone it should take. But the number one thing you need to do is to give it examples. Remember, an LLM is a prediction machine. So it can only, remember what it's doing fundamentally is looking at what you've asked for, going into its training data and trying to predict what you want. Well, it can't do that if you haven't given it enough information. So the more specific information you can give it, the better output you're going to get. Inputs equals outputs. So that's the first thing that you can do in a nutshell. I also think people need to think about prompting in a different way. I think people think that prompting is a 5-minute job or a 10-minute job. In fact, I think prompting is a 1 hour, 2 hour, potentially even 3 hour job. And it's really important to get right, to get the outputs that you want. And then further down the line, you'd want to look at specific bespoke tools that you could build out for the company that could potentially automate some of that workflow. And you also want to enable all your employees to be thinking about what LLM to choose from. So give them the creative freedom to choose the LLM that works best for them. Maybe they want to experiment with GPT 4.1 that just came out, or maybe they want to use Claude, and ask them to experiment and see which one is producing the best copy and which LLM do they like working with.
Because I think this area around prompting is a meaningful one to bring up, and like the extent to which you would go about your prompting. I think it's going to be the difference between a successful output and an unsuccessful output. So I think it'd be quite interesting, for viewers to understand what good looks like in maybe slightly more depth.
So I wrote for a big magazine in the UK, the Reader's Digest. It's actually a really prestigious publication. It's just closed down after 86 years, actually. And the reason I wrote for them is I responded to a shout out for a pitch for their coronation issue, the coronation special in May 2023. And the editor had put out a shout out for any pitches related to the coronation for a special issue. And since I have an MA in history and I've written about the royal family extensively for other history magazines, I thought this would be a really good one. But I also wanted to do something that thought outside the box. So what I actually did is I got an LLM to write the pitch for me, to come up with some ideas. So I fed it that piece of information. So that's an example of where you're asking it to do something really specific. So I literally just screenshotted the call out for the pitch, and then immediately it knew the magazine. So it obviously had the magazine already in its training data. So if you were writing for an in-house magazine at a corporation, obviously it wouldn't have that data because it's not as well known. So you'd need to feed it that data, and then say come up with some ideas for me. Come up with 20 ideas for me was essentially what I did, and it did. It came back with some really good ideas, and that was the first time I used an LLM. And again, this was 2023. I actually pitched to a magazine, and I won the pitch. I was commissioned to write the article, which was about Charles's path to the throne, and so. The LLM went about doing some research and started looking into, all the things that had happened behind the scenes, like when Charles sat for his portrait, for the banknotes. There was an operation informally called Operation QC, which was about whether Camilla would be known as Queen or whether she would be known as the Princess Consort, which was the initial plan. So there were all sort of lots of intrigue about that. So I wrote the piece, and it was actually published in the magazine. So of course I looked over it and edited it, but you can see how the writing process was broken down into different steps. First of all, writing the pitch and understanding the context of the magazine that you're writing for, and then coming back and actually writing the article and doing the research. So you need to continue to have oversight onto all of those different aspects, but it is very much like a production line in what you feed it.
I love how two Brits have managed to find their way onto a topic about the royal family.
Yes, yeah. How long did it take?
How long did it take?
Yeah.
But actually, on the topic of, I suppose, of governance and what that might mean for AI and in the future, and I guess almost, like speed to market for companies to take up use of AI. Like, how are you seeing things play out when it comes to industries that are heavily regulated and there's a lot of compliance? I mean, I know an awful lot about these kind of sectors and the level of potential hesitancy there. How are you seeing things play out?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we tend to avoid larger conglomerate companies that have a lot of compliance for that reason. But we're seeing things, I think, start to shift and start to change. I think the reality on the ground is compliance is slowing things down. And if you're a big company, you need to be able to move. So if you're a smaller player, if you're one person, if you're two people, you can leverage generative AI, if you can leverage some of these LLMs, and you can leverage automation and all the amazing technology that's come out. I mean, we haven't even talked about the image generators or the video generators. The reality is you can move faster than these bigger companies because the bigger companies are tied down with compliance. So at some point that's going to come to a head, because if the 3 or 4 person company can generate more revenue and more profit than the company that has 5,000 employees because that company can't move, then that's a problem. Of course, there are ways around that. I think we talked a little bit last night at the meeting about how those companies can essentially just set up a new company and can assign 2 of their employees to go and work for that company, and then they don't have to do compliance to go away and research whether they can adopt something to avoid it. So, smart companies obviously do circumnavigate it, but I think that this is going to come to a head at some point. That if you're a smaller company, you're at an advantage, not just because of the amount of generative AI that you can use, but the speed at which you can move that these bigger conglomerates can't. You don't have to keep hiring people over and over again if you want to put out a bigger output. So you can actually match what the output of a bigger company is doing. And so you can potentially end up with a 4-person company, if you're really smart, that can make potentially billions of dollars. That's what Sam Altman talks about, the first company with 1 person that's made $1 billion. You can potentially outperform another company that can't use some of the LLMs because they're stuck and bogged down in compliance and they can't move fast enough. And also they're so slow because they have so many employees. So I can see this shift taking place, particularly over the next 5 or 6 years. But some of these bigger companies, of course, have more capital behind them. And we saw a report that by 2026, most companies expect to be in the process of hiring a chief AI officer. Like we have a CTO and a CIO. There'll be, I guess, a CAIO or CAO.
Yeah, and I suppose from I guess a kind of internal point of view, company culture might therefore be important, almost like the willingness to adopt. So if companies are wanting to employ a chief AI officer and so on, that's a good indication that their arms are wide open to the technology. But do you imagine a world where some employees or some businesses are resistant because they're concerned it might take their job? I know we said that, like, okay, there's a lot of hype, but I think that might be a sentiment from a lot of people, especially in a difficult job market, let's say.
Well, there are 2 things at play. First of all, I think you have to alleviate people's fears a little bit. I don't think the media has done a very good job at representing what AI is or the AI industry. I think they've done a lot of damage, actually. So that's the first thing. That's why education is one of our core components. Helping people understand the technology, helping to help them understand that it isn't necessarily going to take their jobs. We're just going to be thinking about things in a perhaps more different way. Second of all, I think ultimately companies that don't embrace AI, like any technology, at some point you have to embrace it. There's always going to be some companies, but if we look around the world now, most companies have embraced computers, laptops, the internet. It's just commonplace. You wouldn't set up a company now and not have the internet. So that's just the way that it is. So I think this is sort of those companies that say they're not going to adopt it. At some point they will. That's what happens with all new technology. If you want to be competitive, then you obviously have to adopt it.
So is it almost like there's a natural progression from this term? I think we discussed it the other day about the Internet of Things to the AI of Things.
The Internet of Things. We haven't heard that term in a long time. Well, I think the Internet of Things has been replaced by AI in many ways, and been replaced by perhaps the Model Context Protocol, which is a way of connecting AI models to different tools. You can sort of control your light bulbs and your things like that. The Internet of Things was about physical devices connecting with each other, and LLMs I think will certainly start to become integrated into that space. We're certainly seeing them. Amazon have announced Alexa Plus, and they're starting to roll that out, which is basically Alexa with Claude embedded in it. Yeah.
I feel like the space generally is very noisy when it comes to AI, and I've been on the receiving end of the benefit of attending your sessions where we sift through some of the kind of the important announcements in this space. And a lot of people don't have access to that. They're perhaps just receiving sound bites about this new tool, or they're being advertised to on social media about a tool that can solve all their problems, etc. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what do you believe is hot right now in terms of in the AI space, or let's say what's relevant?
As of May the 21st, I definitely think the Codex model, which has just come out from OpenAI, which is a version of one of their reasoning models, O3, which has been specifically designed for coding. So what it means is it can literally go off and do tasks for you, a bit like some of the deep research models. So it can go off for 20 minutes, and it can complete your coding tasks for you. And if you look at that space, generally OpenAI has just bought Windsurf, I think for $3 billion, a huge amount of money, which is another one of these tools that will basically write code for you. We've got Cursor as well, which is a massive tool that lots of people use to write code. And we've also got Claude as well, which is going to be bringing out some model upgrades, I think imminently within the next 2 weeks. So I think what's hot right now are upgrades to the coding models. And so I think any dev needs to be trained up on how to use these tools, how to approach code, but also an understanding of how to thoroughly vet and thoroughly check this code as well, to make sure that things are running as they are. I think that's what's hot as of now is advancements in this in the coding space.
So I think I heard someone say, or it was written somewhere, that the language of AI would be English, something along those lines. But
so I think I know what you're referring to. So it's a quote, and someone said, if I was learning a program language today, it wouldn't be Python or JSON, it would be English. And what they meant by that was, the hottest programming language is basically knowing how to understand Cursor, Bolt, Windsurf, or Claude code. Yeah.
So do you think there's any merit in that, or do you feel that people that actually want to build in the AI space are always going to need this understanding of coding language?
As of right now, you need to have an understanding of code, and you need to have an understanding of the principles of them. You don't necessarily need to write the code yourself, but you need to understand what's going on. You need to know that for a whole manner of very important reasons. But just to give you an anecdote, when you vibe code or you use some of these tools, often what we're doing now with AI models is we're doing simple API calls. So we're simply calling a model or a piece of data that already exists. So when we're building something, we're saying, okay, call ChatGPT, and now go away and call the image generator, and now call this function, call this library, and we've just put a nice little wrapper and a nice UX around it. So if you do these API calls and you ask one of the tools to go away and do this, they may well expose your API key. So that means if you've just written a whole page of HTML, which is the code of websites, and you put that out and you publish that, anybody can simply right click and press view inspect, and they can grab your API key, and your API key is then exposed, and bots can maliciously come on the internet and just whack your API spend or use it for their programs. Before you know it, you've got $1,000, $2,000, $200,000 bill. And so what you need to do in that scenario would be to put your API key as a variable in an environment, so it's locked away and it's not in that initial HTML. But people who aren't coders, who just know about the English language, perhaps wouldn't know that, so they wouldn't be able to check if that was that case or not until it was too late. So that's one small anecdote of something that you wouldn't know unless you were a coder. So that's why it's important you have an understanding of the principles, and why devs need to be adopting these tools in the same way that writers have an understanding of the English language and need to be adopting LLMs into their workflow to make them better. It's not that the ordinary person on the street can just sort of use them. They can, but you need to be aware that you may make an error or an oversight like that needs to be corrected.
I generally have this view, and I wondered how you feel about it, but like going forward, I feel like there's more need for people in a specific domain to have this slight knowledge of either coding or AI, so that they become almost bilingual, in terms of the languages that they can speak. So they might be a brand strategist, for instance, and they can speak to an AI engineer, and they can meet in the middle, and they know what they're trying to achieve. How do you feel about that? Is that something that you're seeing as well, or does it depend what you're trying to achieve? Are you just wanting to be someone that's almost like a super user of AI, or in contrast to someone that wants to be someone that builds in this space?
So I think you're trying to put things in a box, and I think every company works in a different way. And the reality is, with any new technology, there's a period of experimentation where people really work out how they use it. We think about the internet, we think about computers. Not every company uses computers or uses the internet in the same way, and not every company uses the same piece of software. Some companies use Notion. Some companies spend 10K a year on Salesforce, or even 10K a month on Salesforce. Some use HubSpot, and some businesses literally just communicate over WhatsApp. They don't have a system. So there's no overarching system, and I think the same is true with LLMs. In some companies, people are going to be more old school, and perhaps having a chief AI officer or somebody who knows the technology for everybody else in the company to go and consult with, and having someone on hand to do education sessions every week could be helpful. And then in some other companies, having a writer who's like an AI powered writer who knows everything about how to produce really good copy with LLMs is going to be vital. So I really think it depends on the company, and as you say, what they want to achieve. Obviously, a startup is going to have less resources in that early stage, so they're probably going to want everybody to be making the biggest impact that they can, and the easiest way to do that in 2025 is with AI tools.
I want to sort of go back to like this kind of big picture thinking, and sure. I think that's how you like to describe yourself, and like where you see things going, which I feel like it's pretty unclear, perhaps, where things are going. Technology is accelerating at such a high speed and rate, and But at the same time, you probably have a natural inclination to understand like where you see this generative AI space going, and is it a shift in mindset that people will need to kind of get in line with to kind of meet it at the future? How are you seeing things playing out?
So that's a really good question. The first thing to understand is that there's a huge gap between where most people are at and most people's understanding of AI on an employee level and where Silicon Valley is at. And that gap is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I think this year we've slightly seen it move this way because I would say probably a year ago it would be taboo to say that you're a writer and you're using LLMs. I think that could perhaps preclude you from applying to a job. And we saw the use of AI detectors, which don't work. But again, people were misinformed. They thought that they did to try to weed people out who'd used AI. And I see a lot more tolerance of it now in corporations. I see a lot more CEOs and HR managers happy that actually encouraging writers to use LLMs to make themselves better. So that's certainly a mind shift that is taking place and that needs to take place. So we are, have to embrace this technology, I think, and meet it in the middle. And I think not enough is being done to see the benefits of it in people's everyday lives and in the workplace as well. And we saw for a while that companies would actually ban their employees from using ChatGPT or from using Claude, and they're actually banned within the Wi-Fi of the company. And I think that's the wrong approach. And I think this year we've started to see that shift. So I think that is a positive step in the right direction. And we've seen a lot more people, I think, become engaged in the space, interested in it. And we've seen CEOs really start to see that, okay, this isn't a fad, this isn't a hype, it's not going to go away. So we really have to do something about it. And we've seen a lot of people think more strategically about it as well. I think thinking about it in a panic is the wrong way to think about it, and thinking we need to act right now and we need to just automate everything and just implement everything now. We saw Duolingo decide that they were going to do that and then actually roll back on that. We've seen a number of companies decide they're going to just suddenly try to automate everything and then it kind of doesn't work. And I also think just being stagnant and doing nothing and trying to avoid the technology is also not the right approach. I think the right approach is to think about it strategically, to look at your SOPs and to take it step by step and realize that this is a long-term project, a 1 or 2 year project, and to have somebody like me from AI to the World come in there and actually try to work with the CEO and with the heads of department to go step by step on the SOPs and the processes to try to look at where there can be sort of small wins and then to execute very efficiently to make sure these projects are done well and timely and that everybody in the company is on board.
As we come to some sort of close for this very first podcast, I wondered if you were to say one thing to an audience which is predominantly going to be people in the brand space as a kind of final sort of insight or piece of advice to them. I'm interested to know what you'd say to them.
Yeah, my advice would be this. LLMs are going to make everybody more creative. I hope that they will make people more creative and they will make creative people go beyond the realm of what they were able to do before and become even more creative. And I think that they will sort of weed out people who are less creative. And I think that there will be a gap. So I think if you can embrace the creativity of LLMs, you can really spend time getting to understand how this technology works and being creative with them. You can really put your input on steroids and you can really do a lot with them. And not just with the LLMs, I think also with the image generators as well. So from a brand perspective, being able to just go from what's in your head, like the conception, to actually seeing a really rough draft. That in the past, you would have had a meeting about it and then gone away and waited for a first draft from a graphic designer. You can now get more easily from what's on your head to in the paper in like a split second. And I think that's so powerful. And I really think people should be thinking about that and embracing how they can how they can use that, instead of thinking about it as some kind of threat or some kind of competition to them. I don't think it is in competition with you. I think it's about embracing it and making yourself more creative and being intuitive with the technology.
Harry, I wanted to thank you for joining me on this inaugural podcast. I wanted to thank you very much for allowing me to attend your weekly meetings here and bringing AI to the world. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.